was the game that made you a Squaresoft fan? Was it Final Fantasy or Kingdom Hearts? For me, it was Secret of Mana. This action RPG absolutely captivated me in 1993, and I have a lot of fond, nostalgic memories for this. But if you lived in Japan or in Europe, your memories might be a little bit different. Hi, I'm Chris Kohler, and this is Complete Inbox, a series in which we take a look back at classic video games by looking at all the stuff that came with them. The box, the manuals, the maps, and look at how all that stuff impacted your gameplay experience. Today we have got one of my all-time favorite games. It is Secret of Mana for the Super Nintendo. It was released in 1993 by Squaresoft. It is an action RPG, and it was directed by Koichi Ishii, who had worked on the Final Fantasy games, but the Mana series was his baby. So Secret of Mana is the US version of a game called Seiken Densetsu 2 in Japan, where it was released for the Super Famicom. That's the Japanese version of the Super Nintendo. So what was Seiken Densetsu 1? It was a Game Boy game, and it was actually released here in the US as Final Fantasy Adventure. It was very specifically a spin-off of the Final Fantasy series. It had chocobos, and it had Moogles, and it had various other Final Fantasy type elements in an action RPG. Secret of Mana is just a beautiful game. The music is absolutely stunning. Some of the best music on the Super Nintendo. The graphics are beautiful. These are pixel art masters operating at peak performance. Like, the stuff is just, it's so well drawn and so pretty to look at. The gameplay is great in parts, maybe a little bit broken in some parts, and the reason for that, apparently, is because this game was originally being developed for the Super Nintendo CD-ROM drive that was going to come out at some point, but when that got canceled, they had to move it to cartridge and chop it up, basically. Secret of Mana was just absolutely mind-blowing for me. It combined Final Fantasy-style RPG stats and weapons and numbers type gameplay with action. So basically the game kind of played out like Legend of Zelda, except for when you hit an enemy, numbers popped out, and you had tons of armor that you could equip on your characters, and all kinds of stats that you could level up, really blending the action and the RPG together in a way that some games had done in the past, but that Secret of Mana really just expertly did. And so Secret of Mana, for me and a lot of people, functioned as kind of a gateway drug into the world of RPGs. It took the action Zelda kind of gameplay that we preferred, and instead of making us pick the word fight off of a menu, you could just press a button, swing your sword, and hit the enemy. It was a combination of fast twitch action with the statistics sort of stuff, the sort of thing that we would say today when a game has RPG elements added into it. So we'll start with the Japanese box. So here's a box for Seiken Densetsu 2 on the Super Famicom. So you will notice, if you have not seen the Super Famicom box before, that the box is actually very long. Sometimes a game would have its box art horizontally like this, but often this is how they would do the box art, and it would be this portrait orientation, this one beautiful, very tall picture. And so this incredibly gorgeous illustration of the Mana tree. Here's our main characters for the game, the boy, the girl, and the sprite, and they're all way down here at the bottom, very tiny, and you see the grand majesty of the Mana tree, towering over them. It's beautiful. Square at this time in Japan, was very popular. Final Fantasy series was very popular. They knew people were going to buy this game. They didn't really have to explain very much about this game. And so if you look at the back of this box, it just has the portrait of the characters, these wonderful clay sculpts of the main characters. It has the logo, it has some more art, and then it pretty much just says one sentence that's like, we've added motion battles to create a new era of RPGs. And that's it. I mean, that is how they sold the game. It's like RPGs plus motion battles. Here's the characters. We know you're going to buy it. And yeah, people absolutely did. What I love about the Super Famicom boxes is they actually have this plastic tray on the inside of them that perfectly holds the cartridge and even has a little spacer for the manual here. I think that that's great. I mean, even though the box is not plastic, it kind of reinforces the idea that this is like a keepsake. You're supposed to keep this all together, put everything back in the box when you're done. The cartridge here, here's the Super Famicom cartridge for Seiken Densetsu 2, obviously shaped differently than the Super Nintendo games. One of the interesting things about the manual here, they did these really neat clay sculptures of the characters. Then they also had made, apparently, for this instruction manual and other promotional use, there's a plush version of Flammy, the dragon that you ride on. I cannot tell you how much I want to own one of those. I don't know where that plush is. Maybe it's in a vault somewhere at Square Enix headquarters. Maybe it's been destroyed, but that thing is super cool. This instruction manual, as you might imagine, is just beautifully designed. But what I really wanted to point out, in the Japanese version of this game, the characters actually have names. You may have played the remake of Secret of Mana for the PlayStation 4 recently, and noted that the boy, girl, and sprite main characters now all have names, Randy, Popoi, and Purim. Those were actually the names of the characters in the Japanese version. That was kind of strange when people saw those names, I think, if they didn't know that in the remake version. But no, those are actually the canonical names. They just didn't carry those over for the Super Nintendo version. So really what I want to talk about is what I got on Christmas morning, which is the US version of Secret of Mana. So let's go ahead and do that now. So the first thing that you're going to notice here is they used the same artwork from the Japanese box. The only problem is, because all American Super Nintendo games had to be horizontally oriented like this, and because the box itself had different dimensions, they could only use the bottom of the artwork, which means that even though this is sort of zoomed in a little bit more and we can see more of our characters, the whole entire top of the mana tree has been cut off. So this box does not look as good as the Japanese one. I'm pretty sure that the back of this box is not just going to say a motion battle RPG and leave it at that. I think they're gonna have to go in for the harder sell. And indeed they do. Secret of Mana, good and evil battle for a young warrior's heart. I like that. There's absolutely nothing like that in the game, I don't think. I don't think there's anything about like a struggle with the main character being pulled towards good or pulled towards evil. They make it kind of sound like he's Luke Skywalker. There's never really anything like that in the game, but it's a good line. It's a world turned upside down that you must help the warrior make right. And the only way to succeed is to solve the secret of mana. Nothing like that is in the plot of the game. That's a nice line though, it's good. We have some beautiful screenshots showing us some of the big boss characters we're gonna fight. There's Flammy again, our dragon pal, shown very up close and personal in one screenshot. Importantly, on the Japanese box and the US box, it has the logos for the Super Nintendo multiplayer adapter, because Secret of Mana, you could play it, with 3 players if you wanted to. You could have one player controlling the boy, one controlling the girl, one controlling the sprite. To do that, you needed the 5-player adapter because the Super Nintendo only had 2 controller ports, so they had to point that out for you. To have a 3-player role-playing game was really, really interesting at that point. And that was a big selling point, the idea that you could, even if you liked a Final Fantasy game, you were playing it by yourself, the idea that you could then bring in 2 friends and play through this Zelda-esque sort of game, that was really unique, and it was tons of fun, for sure. And the last really important thing about this box, in big red letters at the bottom here, brought to you from the makers of the Final Fantasy series. Now, Final Fantasy II had only just come out in the US a couple of years prior to Secret of Mana, and it wasn't really that popular. Final Fantasy was not yet a huge worldwide brand, but Nintendo and Square wanted it to be one, so they were trying really hard to get American players to buy Final Fantasy games. Now, Secret of Mana knew that there were some people out there who did like Final Fantasy, so they really wanted to make sure that if you like Final Fantasy, you know that you should buy this too. So whenever we post an episode of Complete in Box, everybody always asks in the comments for more role-playing games, because they know, as do I, that RPGs are usually stuffed with really great manuals, posters, maps, all kinds of stuff. So absolutely, let's not waste any more time. Let's go inside this box. Okay, so the most important and yet most boring part of this whole entire thing, we have the Secret of Mana cartridge, on which is probably still my original saved games from 1993. Here we go. The instruction manual for Secret of Mana. Now here they get to use, because this instruction manual is sort of portrait orientation and is thus a lot longer, they can actually use the full mana tree artwork that appeared on the Japanese box. So that you get this gorgeous piece of artwork here. We go to this front page and oh look, there's a different picture of that plush Flammy. Every time I see a picture of this thing, I just want it more. So we get this, you know, wonderful introduction to the game that not only kind of introduces the game's story, but actually tells us like what's going to happen, the gameplay progression throughout the game. Talking about you have to seek out the 8 palaces of the world, find the mana seeds. When you touch a mana seed, its orb transfers to you and you become stronger. So really kind of just like giving the player an overall sense of like what the adventure is going to entail, you know, getting you hyped up for this big quest you're gonna go on. So there's a couple of pages here that are just devoted to the idea of leveling up. Now, if you're in Japan at this point where RPGs are a very, very popular genre, you probably already understand, probably just from playing like the first Dragon Quest or whatever, that you don't just rush through all the levels of the game. You take your time, you kill enemies, you get stronger, and you level up. And that's gonna help you take on later challenges. Well, I mean, certainly from my perspective, when I first played the first Final Fantasy game, I didn't know anything about that. I just ran from all the battles and just tried to get as far as I could, as fast as I could. Bad idea. I mean, if you were playing Super Mario Brothers and just ran past all the enemies, you still win. But if you play Secret of Mana and you run past all the enemies, you fail to level up and you will quickly find yourself very frustrated. So this instruction book is like, hey, level up, you have to do it. And then starts the walkthrough called the Traveler's Log. One of the things that these early RPGs did when they were trying to get this new audience into RPGs was it would put a walkthrough in the box. They'd take the last few pages of the manual, maybe half of the manual, and they would actually give you a little mini strategy guide to walk you through the steps of the game, to kind of tutorialize it for you so you'd understand what you were doing, give you tips to beat bosses, with the idea that once you kind of got through that section, you would be a little bit more comfortable with how to play an RPG and understand all the options available to you and be able to go off on your own. So it just tells you like, do this, do that. Hey, when you get to this village, go visit the item shop in this village. Don't just go run to the first objective. Look through the whole village, see what's going on. It's funny because it says, visit the item shop. If the store has bandanas, buy one. The store has bandanas. The store always has bandanas. In everybody's game, store always has them. And we come to the end of this walkthrough and the end of the instruction manual, but there's one last little box here that says, hey, if you're still stuck, and quite frankly, in Secret of Mana, there are definitely places where you will get stuck, and you're wondering what to do next, you can buy Secret of Mana, the official strategy guide. And for more information on this, refer to the postcard included in your Secret of Mana game pack. Well, let's try to find that, shall we? What's this? This is not a postcard for the Secret of Mana strategy guide, but it is something wonderful that would occasionally come with a Super Nintendo game. And you know, I guess I could have taken this out and push-pinned it to my wall, but I decided it really should stay in the box. It is a gorgeous, if folded in half a whole bunch of times, poster of that wonderful Secret of Mana artwork. Now in its full glory, its full resolution, and absolutely beautiful for you to gaze upon the majesty of the Mana tree. But what's really important is what's on the back of this poster. And that is this. It is the map of the world of Secret of Mana. On the Super Nintendo, they decided to try something technologically fun with how you navigate the world of Secret of Mana, which is it uses the Super Nintendo hardware feature known as Mode 7 to create a pseudo 3D map that Flammy the Dragon flies over as if you're just flying over the globe and you see everything down there below you. I have played this game a lot. I cannot just navigate that map from memory because it is just so difficult to figure out where you are on that map just looking down at it. And so this is not only a really cool, thing to include with the game to just give you a sense of the scope of the world, but it's actually a extremely useful item to have sitting next to you as you are playing this game. Ah, here we go. It's a postcard, and it is the strategy book offer for the Secret of Mana, the official strategy guide. And it says in this book here, what is the secret? Is there a secret of mana? Is there one secret of mana? I have no idea. Ooh, no, this is cool. This is actually an ad for Final Fantasy Legend 3 on the Game Boy. So this is now trying to convert that Secret of Mana customer into a customer of more Squaresoft games. Pick up a copy of Final Fantasy Legend 3 this fall. Ooh, have you challenged these classics for the Super NES? Final Fantasy Mystic Quest and Final Fantasy 2 are both on here as well. So that's what came inside the box of Secret of Mana for the Super Nintendo in America. I think we can all agree it's a really cool package. The box art, cut off as it may be, is gorgeous. And then of course you got the full-size version on the poster. You've got a wonderful manual that walks through so many things. You know, you've even got some bonuses in the form of a little postcard. And that's really cool. But what might be even cooler is what they got in Europe. So you might know that here in the United States, we had a game called Earthbound, an RPG for the Super Nintendo that came in a big cardboard box that held the game and its entire full strategy guide. So no more little walkthroughs in the back of the instruction manual. You got the whole walkthrough, everything with the game. In the US, Earthbound was the only game that got that big box treatment on the Super Nintendo, but that wasn't the case in Europe. A few other games also got Earthbound style packaging, including Secret of Mana. This was one of the ways that Secret of Mana was released in PAL territories, in this case in Germany. This is a German Secret of Mana box, and it is, as you can see, a huge, gorgeous, Earthbound sized box. Looks very much like its little brother in the US, same logo, same art and everything. But inside this box, in addition to the German version of the game, is a full-size strategy guide. I know you want to look at it, so do I, so let's open up this really amazing European limited edition of Secret of Mana. So before we go inside the box, I don't read German at all, but it seems like this is actually a translation of what's on the US box. The US box said, "Good and evil battle for a young warrior's heart." You can see there's one screenshot here that shows that the game itself is also in German. That wasn't always the case. Like sometimes they would just take the game in English and then translate just the manual and the box into whatever language they were going to translate it into, and then you had to kind of play it in English. But in this case, this is really interesting. They actually translated Secret of Mana into multiple European languages. When this game came out in Germany, there were not any Final Fantasy games available in Europe. Secret of Mana may really have been a lot of people's first taste of Squaresoft RPGs, not because they weren't into the idea of Final Fantasy, but because it simply didn't exist in Europe. So here's the game. You will note about PAL or European Super Nintendo cartridges that they called the machine the Super Nintendo, but the cartridges are not like the American ones. They actually look exactly like the Japanese ones. Just a weird bit of historical trivia there. And then here's what really, besides the giant box, here's what really distinguishes this, is that this is the official Nintendo strategy guide for Secret of Mana, and it was included inside of the box. Look, even though I don't read German, I can pretty much tell you what Das Ring menu is, and certainly Die Monster Boss. The map is built in here. You don't need it on its own separate poster because here it is. Weirdly, there were 21 locations on the map included in the US version. There's 37 locations here in the European version. The game is the same. I think in the US one, they did not want to spoil all of the locations, so it actually makes that map a little bit less useful. But since this is the strategy guide rather than just the instruction book, they have spoiled absolutely every location that you could possibly go to on the map. I don't think we really saw this in the US instruction book. Some really nice, large size illustrations of a lot of the main characters too. Oh, even illustrations of all the items. Like if you want to know canonically what the chocolate looks like in Secret of Mana, here it is. It's got little bunnies on it. And then of course the walkthrough starts up. So you get all of your boss strategies, walking you through, showing you all the points of interest in all of the dungeons, things like that. This is something that even the walkthrough in the manual in the US version did not do. That was sort of just basic kind of stuff. But this really, now here's maps of all of the different areas, pointing out points of interest, how doors connect together, things like that. And here's the monster boss. Some of the names are the same, like this guy was called Tropicalo in the US version, he's called Tropicalo here. Some of them are very different. I'm pretty sure this guy was not called Thrill Boy in the US version, but I love that. And, you know, it's a strategy guide. It walks you through the game, it tells you about all the enemies, tells you what their hit points are, etc. It's not often that we see a strategy guide that walks you through the entire game packaged in with that game. Like, typically it's something that they'll sell you later if you're having trouble, but I think what was going on here with role-playing games is that they really wanted to make sure that these audiences in the early 90s in the US and Europe who might not be as familiar with the idea of a video role-playing game got taught how to play an RPG, but also kind of had that confidence of saying, okay, this is a big quest, but I have a walkthrough. I am gonna be able to get help whenever I need it to finish out this whole entire game. And maybe by the end of it, they'll be a big RPG fan. So that's Secret of Mana, one of the first Squaresoft games to actually be released in Japan, the US, and Europe. And depending on where you were, your box and manual were very, very different. But no matter where you were, it was still a timeless classic. I'm Chris Kohler, and this has been Complete in Box. Wait a minute, my brother got this for Christmas. Is this not mine? Anyway, possession is 9/10 of the law. Can't prove anything. Jury of my peers, habeas corpus.